My name is Dominic D'Andrea, and I am the Director of Community Engagement at Queens Theatre and the producer for the show. And I just wanted to start by saying thank you so much for those of you who are taking the time to join us tonight from your living rooms or wherever you might be during the time of COVID. We always want to stop and acknowledge how unusual and pressing this time is. So wherever you are, we hope that you're happy, that you're healthy, that you have everything that you need. And if for any reason you need resources, especially if you're Queens based, please do not hesitate to reach out to us here at Queens Theatre. But we've designed this series of programming called QT at Home, which is a series of performances, community engagement events, cooking shows, all kinds of stuff happening throughout the week. And we'll have another round of that programming starting very soon. Our QT Makes baking series and our story circles for this round have just completed. And we have another week of David Lawson Storytellers next week as well. And then a bunch of other programming that we will be announcing. Tomorrow night at 7:30 p.m., we have a Spanish language global concert that we're producing called Sound of the Borders. It will be totally in Spanish and hosted by QT's own Willie Masquera. And we have performers from Ecuador and from Argentina and from Queens and really from everywhere who are coming on. They're all women identified artists, and they're coming on and singing songs and sharing their music and stories with us in Spanish. It's completely free. So if you'd like to join, just log on again to the Zoom or to the Facebook, and we'll see you there. So this performance tonight is streaming in two places. If you're on the Zoom as an active audience participant, hello and welcome. And there are also a bunch of people watching live via our Facebook stream. Hello to you on Facebook. Hello to you on the Zoom. We appreciate you joining us here tonight. And I also want to take a moment to acknowledge and thank this beautiful and talented collection of storytellers that have come together tonight to share their work ideas and their stories with you. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Mr. David Lawson to the screen. Hello,
hey,
David.
Dominic.
Thanks so much yet again for being here and for your work and leadership for the last few weeks. It's been a pleasure to have you. As many of you know, we had Queen Storytellers in person, and when COVID hit and everything had to shut down, this was the first show that we had to call David and say, you know, this is not going to happen. And he was very understanding, but we're so thrilled to be able to bring it back in this digital platform. So I'll let you take it away. Thank you, community. Thank you, Jay Rogers, who's our stage manager for tonight. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Dominic. And good evening, everybody. Welcome to Queens Storytellers Online. I am your host tonight, David Lawson. We have a great show for you tonight. So let's get right into it. Our first performer tonight is a regular on the SiriusXM show Tell Me Everything, hosted by John Fugelsang. She has appeared on the TV shows An Evening at the Improv, Caroline's Comedy Hour, and Saturday Night Live. Please welcome Rhonda Hansome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here, and I love Zooming. It makes me feel all dark and lovely. The Bronx. It has Yankee Stadium, a world-class botanical garden, and an award-winning zoo. I now live in the Bronx, and I hate it. Oh, yes, yeah. I grew up in the county of Kings, the borough of Churches, Brooklyn. Do you remember Paul Newman's steel blue eyes in Fort Apache, the Bronx, as he policed the menacing streets of Fort Apache? Or do you remember Melanie Griffith's baby woman voice in Bonfires of the Vanities? These two films created and painted the messy soul of the Bronx for me. And it convinced me that I like my grimy New York, Brooklyn style. It's not that Brooklyn had less violence or a lower drug-fueled body count. I just loved the county of my birth. That's a lie. As a child, Bed-Stuy, do or die was mostly die. The violence and drugs and burned out buildings made me want to leave as soon as I could. And I did. I did leave with my childhood sweetheart, Phil, and we moved to a 5-flight walk up in Spanish Harlem. The Young Lords, huh? Yeah, anybody remember the Young Lords? They collected our rent, and junkies would pause mid-fix to let us pass by. We were an interracial Romeo and Juliet searching for our Camelot. When we finally said goodbye to Bohemia in Spanish Harlem, Brooklyn welcomed us back with open arms. We actually lived rent-free in a church on Flatbush Avenue as their caretakers. From there, we moved to my first elevator building. Ooh, moving on up. When Flatbush began to feel a little provincial for us, we found cosmopolitan cachet in an isolated little corner of Lower Manhattan. From our apartment off the West Side Highway, it was a short walk to Little Italy, Chinatown, and the Village. But this was in pre-GPS days, and even taxi drivers did not know the way to our apartment complex off the Hudson River. No coffee shops, no banks or traffic lights south of Canal Street made moving to this area a romantic adventure. I was in Independence Plaza. Phil and I settled down and we had a son. His name is Seth. In the years that followed, I was shocked, I tell you, to find myself in the center of the celebrity universe. Yeah. When Robert De Niro christened my neighborhood Tribeca. Oh, now we had coffee shops, we had stores, but just for me to get a cup of coffee, I had to push through celebrities like Naomi Campbell and John Kennedy and Nathan Lane. And that's just in August when there's nobody in New York City. Our gorgeous son Seth grew up playing in the World Trade Center. He had the loving support of his parents when he graduated from Dartmouth. Hey, I believe. And then he went to Japan, where he spent several years teaching English. But when Seth returned, it was to a broken home. Our family had made it through 9/11, but not through our marital strife. When Phil and I divorced, he asked me to move. And by chance, just by chance, I found an inexpensive apartment in a neglected old brownstone in Brooklyn, Bed-Stuy. Well, I got to tell you, I was so depressed. The only time I laughed, getting a divorce is not an easy thing. The only time I laughed was when a visitor, well, actually every visitor to my apartment would say, you should rent out your walk-in closet. You could get $800 a month for that. I would laugh and say, who would want to live in a closet on Macon Street in Malcolm X? Well, the joke was on me. Everybody wanted to live in a closet on Macon and Malcolm X. And they'd pay a lot. I was alone for the first time in my life after my divorce. I had no husband, no work, and no health insurance. My only comfort was that the hood reminded me of my childhood when I would play red light, green light, 1, 2, 3, or double dutch with that girl who was always double-handed and make the rope go collapsing. My life was literally in tatters. I was adrift and distracted. I didn't even notice that the center of the celebrity universe had actually followed me to Brooklyn. My first clue. should have been the one white family that's whiter than white across the street from me. Didn't get the message. Then I missed a huge red flag on the A train. Dun, 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 dun. Usually on the A train, after Borough Hall, my fellow riders were melanin gifted. This night, I got off at my Utica Avenue station and I turned to look at all the people still in the subway car. And I wondered, where are all of these white people going? Someplace for Scientology? I finally got the message when the city repaved Nostrand Avenue and put benches at well-lit bus stops on Fulton Street. Oh my God, I saw white people. I saw white people walking down the street at midnight, heads down in their iPhones, not even looking around their gentrified new world. Bed-Stuy, who'd think it? Blondes and redheads jogging in their little shorts and walking their little dogs. And that was just the men. House after house on my block was sold and bought, completely changing the complexion of my neighborhood. I was urged by a broker to buy the empty brownstone that I lived in. He said, oh, sure, don't worry about the fact that you're unemployed. Your payments won't balloon for another 3 months. Subprime. Well, when the brown-skinned sister who wrote for the New York Post bought my building, I thought, I got this. Little did I know I had dodged a subprime mortgage bullet only to be hit with a cannonball of a rent hike. When my lease was almost up, sister landlady said, well, you can stay here for another year if you want to pay double the rent. Double the rent. My random extra work on movies and TVs left me with a $1,000 budget for rent. But somehow trust fund kids from I don't know where were willing. They were eager to pay 3 times my reasonable rent. I had to leave in 3 months, and I tweeted daily, Mayor de Blasio's affordable housing lottery is a joke. Hashtag de Blasio sucks. All I needed was a nice 1-bedroom for $1,000. After 9 months of looking and a complete and total emotional meltdown, I bought a 1-bedroom co-op in the South Bronx. Yes, I bought a co-op because I didn't earn enough money to qualify for affordable housing. Did I mention Mayor de Blasio's affordable housing lottery is a joke? Hashtag de Blasio sucks. Say it with me. De Blasio sucks. I live in Soundview, that area of the Bronx. Well, there are a lot of sounds, screams, gunshots, not a lot of view. Well, unless you count the chalk outline of bodies on the ground. Well, my first week here, there was a murder around the corner, but after 5 years, I'm sort of used to the fleets of emergency vehicles that will come around monthly for the shootings. But when people hear that I live in the South Bronx, I don't know if you hear what's going on outside there, but when my friends hear that I live in the South Bronx, they're so worried for my safety. Hey, I'm from the real Bed-Stuy, not that newly gentrified streets of lattes and artisanal beers. No, I'm from the do-or-die Bed-Stuy. And besides, people mostly harm and kill those that they know. But I'm a woman of a certain age, and I have to admit, at this age, it is really, really hard adjusting to my new neighborhood, especially since I no hablo español. No, 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 no. And I got to admit, I feel kind of petty when I say I have none of the shops that I prefer here, not even my bank nearby. I feel petty and sad that I bought an apartment in Fort Apache, the Bronx. Oh, speaking of movies, down the street from me, right off the Bruckner Boulevard, York Studios has built a $100 million studio for TV and movie production. Well, I guess I have to get new headshots now and update my resume, huh? And try to get a handle on the new president of the studio down there so I can take him to where the best roast pork can be found in the South Bronx. No, the Bronx isn't burning. The heat that I feel is the center of the celebrity universe just breathing down my back. And that's no lie. Thank you.
Rhonda Hansome. Thank you so much, Rhonda.
Thank you.
Oh, that car coming by outside, just perfect.
Perfect timing, right?
A little God's choreography, as they say.
Yes.
And I'm sure if you watching at home, you've probably done the Craigslist search and found a number of $800 closets that weren't even walk-in closets. Our next performer tonight is a Moth Grand Slam champion. She has performed on the popular storytelling podcasts Risk, The Moth Radio Hour, and Story Collider. Our next performer, please welcome Tracey Segarra.
Hi, everybody. I am Tracey Segarra. So we're to be doing this from my living room. Growing up, I could not wait to be a crime reporter. Now, I grew up right outside of Queens, and I grew up in the 70s when Son of Sam was terrorizing the neighborhoods. And all you heard about was Son of Sam, and it was on the TV and it was in the newspapers. And I started reading the newspapers because the whole summer, it was the summer of Sam. And he started writing to Jimmy Breslin, the Newsday or Daily News columnist at the time. And I was just fascinated. Now, when other kids, my age were reading, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. I was reading Helter Skelter about the Manson murders and every biography of Ted Bundy that I could find. So when I finally grew up and I became a reporter, it's the early 90s, and I am a cub reporter at the Brooklyn paper in downtown Brooklyn. And I love everything about being a reporter. I love the reporter's notebooks that you flip over. I love the press pass that was laminated with my picture and allowed me to cross police and fire lines wherever they were formed. And I crossed them every time I could. And I loved the way the detective, Sergeant Shields at the 78th Precinct in Park Slope, and the other detectives there, we'd sit around and they'd talk about criminals and they'd call them skells and mopes. And I was just in love with the whole excitement of being a reporter. And I couldn't wait to get my first big story, my first above the fold headline, big crime story. And within a few months, I had my first opportunity. Apparently, we got a tip in the newsroom that a young girl, 17-year-old girl, had been hit by a car in the middle of Park Slope in broad daylight, and a few hours later, she died at the hospital. Now, for this weekly paper, Park Slope, Brooklyn it was gentrifying, but 7th Avenue and Park Slope was like the middle of everything. And I was the Park Slope reporter, so this was my story. And I had to call the mother, and we had this thing called a reverse directory back then. And I would look up the address and it would tell you the phone number. And I was a little nervous because this is the first time I'd ever talked to a grieving family. But I called, and the mother was very gracious, and she invited me to come over to their brownstone and talk to her, and she would give me pictures of Fiona. And so I go over there, and I'm a little nervous because, like I said, I've never done this before. And she just welcomes me in with open arms, and she answers every question I ask. And she gives me pictures of her beautiful 17-year-old daughter. And we're a weekly paper, so I don't write the story right away. And the next night, there is a candlelight vigil for Fiona. And so, of course, I go to the vigil, and I'm there with my reporter's notebook and my press pass, and I'm walking around trying to find people who knew her and interview them and get color, for this story. And at one point during the vigil, a woman taps me on my shoulder, and I say, "Hi, did you know Fiona?" And she turns to her husband, and she hesitates, and she says, "Should I tell her?" And the minute she says that, like, the hairs prick up on my arms, and I know it. This is the big scoop. This is what is going to make this front page story. The other papers in New York are going to pick it up. I just know something good is coming. And her husband says, yeah, tell her. And she says, "I'm a medical student, and I was there the night they brought Fiona in." And I said, "Did you talk to her?" And she said, "I held her hand while they were working on her. And at one point she looked up to me and she said, 'I'm not going to make it, am I?'" And the whole world just goes blank for me in that moment. And I totally forget that I'm a reporter and that I'm out here for a story. I don't care about this front page full type that I'm going to get. All I can think about is this frightened 17-year-old girl lying on a gurney in a hospital, knowing that she's going to die. And I go back to the newsroom the next day and I write the story. And yes, it's my first big story, my first big byline. And then this is not where the story ends, because the person who was driving, what happened was this kid was joyriding in a stolen car and he slammed into her and he was charged with manslaughter. So now I have to cover the trial. And I go to this trial every day for like 6 months. And the family is right near me and they talk to me every day. And I become part of this story. And it turns out that the kid who hit her is the same age as her, and he was even in her second grade class. And it's a tragic story from beginning to end. And I'm in this story. And I stay a reporter for a number of years after that. But eventually I leave. And I think I kind of knew, just at that moment during that candlelight vigil, that I wasn't cut out for this kind of work. I just feel things too much. Well, many years later, when I became a mother myself, my twins were about 5 years old, and I happened to read this New York Times article. It was a horrific tragedy. Some of you may remember in Long Island, this family was coming back from a family wedding, and they were like broadsided by a drunken driver. And a little girl who was the flower girl at the wedding, 7 years old, was instantly killed and decapitated. And a couple of days after this happened, her mother held a news conference. And during the news conference, she talked about how she sat there by the side of the road, cradling what was left of her daughter's head in her arms. And in the news story, they say that there was stunned silence from the reporters after she spoke. And as a mother and as a former reporter, I knew why the mother did that. She did that because she knew that for these reporters, this was just another story. And tomorrow there's going to be another one and another one. This was not their tragedy. And she was saying to them, no, you are not going to just pass this by. This was my child. And I always remembered that. And I've kept Fiona with me all these years, and all these years I've been trying to tell this story for all these years, and I just didn't have an ending. I didn't know like what I wanted to say about what happened, but I knew that it affected me so deeply. And I think what I learned from this story and from that mother in that other story is that I was never meant to be a hard-nosed crime reporter, a Jimmy Breslin. You know, I think I was drawn to journalism to tell stories, but it got too close. And so now when I think about Fiona Kachukis, who was 17 years old in 1991 when she died, I think that I meant to tell this story, to tell you that she may have only been 17, but she was an accomplished photographer. She loved horses. She was an adored older sister to her younger sister. And she was respected and loved by her friends and the rest of her family. And so, yes, she lost her life very young. But I think I'm here to tell you this story and that she lived. Thank you.
Tracey Segarra. Thanks so much, Tracey. I mean, they don't need to remind us all the time, but that story to me served as a reminder. We don't need to hear it all the time, but that journalism does matter, and who tells the stories and how really does matter, which I have been thinking about a lot, especially as a lot of folks, as a rather terrifying amount of folks seem to have problems with journalists nowadays. Journalists who, if you got anything from that story, very much care about the public they are covering. Today, May 15th, 2008, that was the day that I moved here to New York City. It is my 12-year New York anniversary today. I had just graduated from college and I didn't even walk at my graduation. My walking at graduation was getting in a van and moving to New York. I moved to New York with my girlfriend at the time. Let's call her Stephanie, because that was her name. We got a 4-month sublet at this place on East 11th Street. And we got a really good deal on this place because this married couple who ran a dance company said to us that they really wanted to give a good deal to a couple of kids in their early 20s who were moving to New York City to put on shows. So they gave us a ridiculously good deal on this sublet. It was the first of so many times that my now fellow New Yorkers have shown me such great kindness over the years. And this place we were living in, it was pre-war. And by that, I mean pre-World War I. It didn't even have a shower. It was the type of place, perhaps you know, places like this that had a bathtub in the kitchen. I moved to New York City. I had saved up a good amount of money for this sublet with the job I had in college. And I also moved to New York with a job lined up and an internship lined up. But at the end of my first week in New York City, both of them had fallen to crap. They both fell apart and I was back to square one, had to find a new job. And I did find a new job. I got hired to be a canvasser for the Human Rights Campaign. That's right, I was one of those jerks with a clipboard standing on a Manhattan street corner, putting up my arms saying, "Excuse me, do you have a minute for gay rights?" And the Human Rights Campaign, when they were training me, they said to me that I needed to stick to the script, that I had to do the script word perfect because, and I swear this is what they said, I had to stick to the script because the script was grown in a lab for maximum fundraising efficiency. They also warned me during training that there was a chance that while standing on the streets of Manhattan, that I might get some pushback from the transgender community. The reason why was back in May 2008, the Human Rights Campaign was raising money to lobby for the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, or EDNA, as it was known as. The Employment Non-Discrimination Act, though, had workplace employment protections for the L, the G, and the B, but had absolutely no protections in the bill for the T. But I can tell you, standing out there on the streets of Manhattan, it was not the T that gave me a hard time. It was the B. And by B, I don't mean bisexual. I mean bigots. People would stop and aggressively point and laugh at me. People yelled slurs at me. One particular older gentleman walked up to me and engaged me in conversation. And after I told him about the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, he said to me, you know, this problem, employment discrimination, is an entirely invented issue. Christine Quinn is New York City Council Speaker, and she is an openly gay woman. So there you go. So there I go. Thing is, though, it wasn't the bigots that got to me the most out on the street. It was me being really bad at this job, because I was 22 years old. I didn't really have the confidence for a job like that. And I also never felt very easy. And still, if I were to go try that job again, which I'm not going to, I never felt easy with the idea of working for a civil rights nonprofit organization, having to hit a daily quota of fundraising, having to use a script that was grown in a lab for maximum fundraising efficiency. So yes, I was a canvasser for the Human Rights Campaign, but I only worked for 2 days before I realized it wasn't for me, and I quit. In those 2 days, this was my grand total of funds raised, $5. And that $5 was given to me by a kid around my age who walked up to me, stuck out a $5 bill and said, "Take this. You look tired and thirsty." I got to tell you, I could have probably pocketed that $5 bill, just kept it for myself, but I did the right thing. I logged it as a donation to the Human Rights Campaign, and I turned it in, and I'm pretty sure that someone at the Human Rights Campaign took that $5 bill and went and bought coffee with it. I did work again on the streets of Manhattan, though. I worked for 4 years on the streets of Manhattan, handing out discounts for an educational museum in the heart of Times Square. And I actually got so many great things out of that job, so many stories that happened to me and happened around me, that I got a one-man show out of working that job, which, to let you in on how my brain works, my biggest sign of success of any job that I can have is getting a one-man show out of it. And today, for the last few years, since October 2017, my sister married this transgender man who works for the Department of Health and Human Services in transgender health. And my brother-in-law, I'm proud to say, is one of many, many people who in their life work has made it so today, May 2020, when an organization like the Human Rights Campaign is lobbying for legislation, they make sure, because of work like folks like my brother-in-law, to include the L, the B, the G, and the T. Thank you so much, folks. Thank you. All right, let's keep this show moving. Our next performer is the host and creator of Other Men Need Help, a podcast that has been profiled by Men's Health, Wired, and the Washington Post. And that podcast has gained our next performer a Webby Award nomination, a Latin Podcast Award, and an award from the Made in New York Media Center. Please welcome Mark Pagan.
Hi, and thanks, David. Happy New York anniversary. Hello, everybody, as well. I hope you're all doing okay. I've had many conversations, as I'm sure you all have had, about what's happening now. Can't prevent myself anytime I have a catch up with somebody. And I had a weird realization this week. I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and I said more or less that this week I am not scared. Something along those lines. I'm not scared of the pandemic and things like that. I'm not saying that right now with any sense of like false hubris. It's not like that started from day one. No, I've been freaking the fuck out, and I'm prone to having fears like anybody else is. You know, this week it's dissipated a little bit, but I have lingering fears. You know, luckily I haven't had to deal with them recently, but I live here in New York. I'm claustrophobic. I really don't enjoy getting on the trains that go into any of the rivers. I go to the dentist, but very reluctantly, not because I don't like my teeth clean, but anything that goes past like the premolars, I just start gagging. So I get really scared during x-rays. Another thing about living here is I don't like walking by groups of teenagers, not because I have any problems with teenagers, but when they laugh and I don't know what the source is, it really, really freaks me out. And I just start patting myself down and looking at, you know, what I'm wearing. But the biggest, like those things I can deal with. They're pretty manageable. The biggest fear though, that still is happening in my life is flying. And I really enjoy taking trips. I actually do like air travel. I like the idea of flying and going places, but I've had a problem with it for about 10 years now. And I've tried a number of things, some of which have been helpful. I have some therapeutic techniques, as well as I have these habits when I get on a plane. I take the in-flight magazine if there's turbulence, and turbulence is usually the problem. That's what sets it off. But I'll take the in-flight magazine when turbulence hits, and I'll do the crossword puzzle to, you know, divert my attention. If turbulence gets really bad, I do this thing where I'll, you know, put my headphones on and I'll listen to music that's very rhythmic, and then move one butt cheek to the other to try to like offset the feeling of turbulence. And I have no idea if anybody is groaning or making a similar, oh, I do that sound. I highly doubt it. But here's my advice to you. Nobody will see you doing it, and it is helpful. But the other thing that I've been doing on the last few years of flights, and I don't know what to call this, but I've been sort of looking for just somebody like a safe person, usually when I'm in line to get on the flight. And, you know, I hate to be paternalistic, but it's like I usually look for an older man, you know, somebody that can just give me a feeling of safety that I can look at or think about on the flight when things get bumpy. The last flight I took, the last official flight before quarantine, was a winter respite out in Los Angeles for a few days. It was great, you know, got some sun and everything like that. And I took a red-eye flight back to JFK. This was back in February. And I took a red-eye flight for the reason most of us take a red-eye flight, you know, get to work early or be on time for work, and take those extra hours, the 3-hour time difference, and get some more sun and eat like really good Mexican food. The thing is, for fearful flyers, red-eye flights are the worst. They're the worst option that you can do. Because as I said about the movie Alien, you know, it's in space, no one can hear you scream. Well, it's dark, everybody's asleep, you're at your most alone and isolated, and nobody's there to like help you with your panic. As well, you can't see that bastion, you can't see that paternalistic figure that's gonna help you out with all of this. But I did it because of the reasons we all do it. I wanted to eat a burrito, I wanted some sun, and I had to get to fucking work. So I get on this flight. It's an Alaskan Airlines flight, you know, whatever time. We start boarding 11:30 p.m. Out of LAX. And I'm in the aisle seat in the emergency row. And the flight is basically, it's fully booked. And there's one seat left, and it's the aisle seat that's also in the emergency row adjacent to mine. And that's the last person that gets in the flight. And boy, did he let everybody know he was on the flight. Dude gets on, he sits down, and one of the flight attendants comes and starts doing the like are you guys ready if the case there's an emergency to take care? And he puts his finger up to interrupt her. And he says, hold on a second. Tell me you have hot food on this flight. And she got seeing a flight attendant get flustered, because I know how much they have to deal with, like is an earth-shattering thing. And she goes, no, we don't have hot food in this flight. We have, some snacks and stuff like that. And he starts going like, it's like a song. It was like a techno song. He starts going, just trying to get from like row to row to row, so everybody could hear this, this chorus that he was emitting of like disdain. He goes, you're telling me you don't have any hot food on this flight? Well, what am I supposed to do? And she was trying to assuage him. Everybody's rolling their eyes. Meanwhile, she's trying to tell us what to do in the middle of an emergency. So he keeps going on and starts vocalizing even more, like what a travesty this is. And I'm thinking, what the fuck is your problem? And I don't say this, but the thought comes to my mind. I was like, you are the worst person in the world. And I'm stuck with this fucker for the next 5 hours in the middle of nothingness. Well, the flight takes off. He's still vocalizing all this shit. And eventually he does whatever he needs to do. I don't know if he falls asleep, but I don't hear him anymore. And the lights go down. We are in red eye flight mode. So somewhere past the Rockies, we're, I don't know, Nebraska or the Midwest, one of the flight attendants gets on and says, more or less like the captain notified us that it's going to get pretty bumpy up ahead. We're going to have the seatbelt sign on. That means not going to the bathroom. And we're probably going to have this on for the remainder of the flight. Which is just bad. Oh man, my alarm goes off. This is just the worst. It's the worst. And yes, I look around and it's completely dark. Everybody's asleep, except for a hot food dude who's sitting next to me in the adjacent seat, the adjacent emergency row seat. And I noticed something. Our actions are mirroring. I reach for the in-flight magazine. He takes out something. It turns out to be his laptop. I reach for a light so that I can do my crossword puzzles. And he opens up his laptop and has light projecting out. And we both get in an erected sort of like emergency, getting prepared seating stance. And I'm like, this dude, he's got to be afraid of flying. That's what's happening here. So I look over to what he's looking at. He's got something on his laptop. And the guy is watching episode after episode of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Now, normally, it's a story it's like, oh, it's a funny detail, but I'm going to posit something else. I want you guys to go down this rabbit hole with me. I don't think that was a random choice. I also don't think there's like a plethora of 90s sitcoms that you could have on your desktop. Like he could be the one guy that's just watching Major Dad in Air on that February night. I think the reason that this guy had episodes after episodes, he had seasons of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air on his desktop, was not just because it's a dope ass show. It's not just because Will Smith is great and funny, but because of James Avery, AKA Uncle Phil. Now, I think for boys of a certain age and for certain boys of color, boys who had either issues with their father or their father wasn't around, boys who were first or second generation kids, for that generation of boys, for a lot of them, Uncle Phil was our protector. And I know this firsthand as well, because I've seen tons of celebrities in my life. I'm not saying that from any sort of egotistical way. I think we all have. We've run into celebrities. And I've seen people react. But I saw James Avery in 1994 at the Cone Zone in Potomac, Maryland, and the world stopped. Children were just following him like the Messiah. It was the most incredible. I've never seen anything like that. People were like parting ways and just waiting for something to say. I don't know who he's with, his wife, but they're just like on bated breath trying to hear what he was going to say. I also know about this protector thing with Uncle Phil because Uncle Phil has been my safety mechanism. There's a famous episode of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air called Papa Got a Brand New Excuse. I think that's the actual name of it, where Will's ne'er-do-well father comes back into town, and at the end leaves him again, to which Uncle Phil cradles and comforts him. And from myself to other producers to ex-gang members and jailed, we have cried and connected and talked about this moment. And here I am sitting over Nebraska with this guy, and I'm like, Uncle Phil, his protector. And so I'm watching with him, and my instinct, my honest instinct was I wanted to reach over. I didn't know what to do or what I would do, but just reach over, just put my hand on his shoulder, just make a bridge in between those aisle seats. Maybe say something. And I didn't do this, I thought it. But instead, you know, I just sort of angled my body and kept my eye on him and kept my eye on his desktop. And he never said anything to me. I never said anything to him, but he knew, because at a certain point during the flight, or at certain points, he would angle his laptop little by little so that I could catch glimpses of Uncle Phil. And I don't know how long this went on for. I eventually fell asleep, which I never do. And however many hours later, I woke up, the flight attendant was making an announcement. We're on our descent, you know, get tray tables up. The sun was coming in through some of the windows. And so I got up and started putting my stuff together. And the guy, the hot food dude, leans over across the aisle and he goes, "Hey," like that to me. And I mean, I just wasn't expecting this. And I was like, oh man, you know what? This is something. Like, you know, one of the things I do love about flying, one of the things I like pray for are those moments, you know, you have with seatmates, or like whether something bad or good happens. Those like private connected moments, and nobody ever says anything. Nobody ever says like, that meant a lot. I needed to talk about my ex-wife or my divorce, whatever it is. And so like this, we're on descent. We had this moment. We had this moment with James Avery. We had this moment over Nebraska. And he leans over and says, "Hey," and I say, "Hey," back to him. And he says, "Ask the guy sitting next to you to open up his window shade." And I said, "What?" And he goes, "Ask the guy next to you to open up his window shade." And I said, "Why?" He goes, "I want to see New York." And I pointed to his window. I said, "You have New York on, there's a window over there. New York is over there too." And he goes, "That's Jamaica Bay over there. Jamaica Bay, we fly into Jamaica Bay. I want to see the city." And just like that, after all we experienced, he became the worst person again. Thank you.
Mark Pagan. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I love storytelling shows, folks, because I love rooting for the happy ending. And when you don't get it, when Mark Pagan's deep well of empathy is for naught, that kills me. That kills me. All right, folks. So before I bring up our final performer this week, I just want to let you know that we have another Queen Storytellers Online show, same bat time, same bat channel, on Facebook Live and on Zoom next Friday at 7:30. We're going to have another great bill of performers for you. I also wanted to say that if you have been enjoying these shows, tell your friends, because once this window closes out for the night, once we all click on leave meeting, and you know, I miss having the hangouts at the shows afterwards, but clicking on leave meeting will have to do for now. Once we do that, folks, just letting you know, this is going to live on the Queen's Theatre Facebook page. So if you enjoyed the show tonight, tell your friend and they could just bring it up. If you've binged everything on Netflix, and I think we're all getting a little close, then tell them to watch Queen Storytellers Online on Facebook. All right, folks, our final performer for this week's show. She has written for Reductress and Thought Catalog, as well as for Fuse TV. Her Twitter account, her hilarious Twitter account, has been profiled by the Huffington Post and the Frisky, and she is the co-host of one of the most unique stage shows in New York City, Relationship, which combines both live comedy with live therapy on stage. Please welcome our final performer this week, Lynn Bixenspan.
Hi. So when David asked me to do this show, I was like, how can any of us think about anything besides disasters, right? Is it like, should I think about something fun and light so that, like, to get our minds off it, or do I delve deep into my well of personal disasters? And I kept thinking about disasters. So that's where I landed. When I was 21, my childhood home burned down in a fire. And that's not what the story is going to be about. That was the first time my home was destroyed. And so fast forward, we get our life together. It's traumatic. I'm still living at home. I'm in college. I move out from Long Island to the big city, Manhattan, because every Long Island kid is like, I gotta move to the city. I moved to the East Village at the time. And so it was 2012, and that's when Hurricane Sandy hit. And I feel like for some people, like in Manhattan, Hurricane Sandy was like, okay, like, things are closing. It's not a huge deal. But where I'm from in Long Beach, which is actually an island to the south of Long Island and right near the Rockaways, it was a big fucking deal. And it's an island, and the ocean met the bay. So it was flooded. And when the warning first came, like everyone should evacuate, there are like two camps. I feel like when you tell somebody like, oh, there's an emergency, like there's the people who are like, oh my God, we have to leave right now. Like, don't even take your purse, just like run out. And then there's people who are like, I think this is fine. I don't think I'm in deep denial. And I don't think it's possible that for some reason I will not be personally affected by this. And for whatever reason, my parents were kind of in that camp, despite being traditionally anxious people. And my brother and I had to convince them, and our 92-year-old grandmother, that like, you got to get the fuck out of there, before you have to swim out of there. So we proactively went and booked them a hotel room, and there were like not a lot of hotel rooms. So we ended up booking them into a hotel room down the block from my apartment. So I'm like, okay, this will be like a week, right? Not thinking like, oh, we, like most of us are trying to get away from our hometowns, away from our parents, and disasters sometimes just, bring us back together. And so they were living down the block from me while this was going on for weeks. Now here's the other disaster going on in my life around then, the relationship I was in, which was an ongoing disaster. My boyfriend of 6 months had moved in with me, at least temporarily, while he was subletting his place. 6 months, right? Probably, you can have different opinions, but like 6 months is probably too soon to cohabitate. But codependence, that's probably one aspect of what was fueling that. The other was that he had lost his job at Outback Steakhouse, and just also had a poker addiction. And I don't know, I feel like it's easy to look back on relationships and be like, I am the good guy, you are the bad guy. Funny details. Yes, that is all true. I am the best. I am perfect. They weren't as good. But truth is, I was also like, thinking I was helping out, but really enabling. So they were moved in with me. And when I would say, like, I was like this highly anxious person, and they would say, this boyfriend at the time would say things like, well, sometimes I don't pay my rent because, when I get that letter from the landlord, like 2 weeks later, it just doesn't give me anxiety. So I don't feel any need to pay my rent. So that's, that was like, the kind of draw of like a couple we were, of like two completely different people. So he's living with me temporarily. My parents are living near me. My relationship is like not really going well. This cohabitation is not going that well. And the one thing that happened while that really stood out to me was like, before I found this place for my parents to live temporarily down the block from me, I had seen that Airbnb was actually giving like free housing to people, which was awesome. And I told him that, and he was like, oh yeah, I read that. I was like, you didn't think to mention to me you know, where my whole family and essentially everyone I know from my hometown is homeless. And he was like, you know, I just didn't think about it. Just didn't think about it. I've got a lot going on right now. I lost my job. I was like, okay, because I thought it was possible for, you know, like, you know, for me to think of you and you to think of me, and that we could like think of both like each other in a couple. And he was silent. So I realized my relationship was going to have to end. But like when you're in a crisis, like you're like, I can't have another crisis. Like maybe this relationship is making things worse, but like I just cannot deal with ending this relationship in the middle of everything else going on. So when we finally get the clear to go back to my parents' house in my hometown, luckily one of my friends has a van, even though like gas is you know, has a huge shortage, but she had a van that was filled with gas. So like my parents, my friend, and I, my brother, like we go back to Long Island with this van to check out what the hell happened to our house. My boyfriend didn't come with us, and I can't remember why. I'm sure there was a terrible reason. And we get there and it's like knee deep water, like the second you step in the house, and a horrifying smell. Like just imagine one of the most like rotten garbage / food decomposing like / like been in the water, so maybe also smells like fish somehow. Like as soon as like you open the door, and then opening the refrigerator, like you really wish you were wearing like one of those hazmat masks. Like I felt like vomiting. So that's like the environment we're in. And my friend who had driven me said to me like, oh my God, this is so traumatic and you guys are handling it so well. And I'm like, well, yeah, because like our apartment burned down. This is old hat to us. And in a weird way it was like, all right, when you have this trauma that you've had before, like sometimes it's like, you know, it's bringing up the old trauma, but sometimes it's just like, well, this isn't as bad as our other trauma. So, you know, we can deal with this. Like it's super cliche, but like we lived, our stuff is not as important. It sucks it's happening again. They're staying near me, like I said, and my boyfriend temporarily moves back to his place, and is supposed to move back in with me in a few months. Again, not happy. I'm not happy with the relationship. He leaves my house one day, and I see that he's still logged in on my MacBook to his email. So I'm sure you all probably have strong opinions about the ethics of snooping. I will say I am an inveterate snoop. If someone had to say like, what is one of your worst qualities, or like I would say like, I can be kind of judgmental and I can be a snoop. On the positive side, I'm also just like a really good detective. And, you know, what are the ethics of snooping? He left that email open. You know, I wouldn't go in a drawer and look at his diary, but I went to log into my Gmail. His was logged in, and the subject line was like, I may be making this up in my memory. All memory is constructed, right? But I swear that the email subject line was something like, hi, oh, so you're finally moving out of New York and leaving your girlfriend, and actually, thanks for sending your resume. Great that you're leaving your girlfriend. Have you told her yet? I don't know, something like that was the subject line. So I had to open it. That was from his sister, and I'm like, because like he had vaguely mentioned that like, you know, if he couldn't find a job, he might have to move, but like not at that level, and that he was so far ahead with it. So I called him and I was like, hey, so like, are you thinking about moving? And I read this email, and he's like, well, you know, my phone's breaking up. Okay, I really think it was. Like, I don't think he was just going like crackling noise like into the phone. He's like, let's talk on chat. So I'm like, okay. Again, like, why this is stupid of me too, because like, why was I like not like, let's wait to talk in person? But you know, when like you're so anxious, you're like, I just got to get this conversation, I can't wait. And so we're chatting on Facebook chat about this really important stuff, and he's like, I'm like, well, you know, we need to just like, if you need to move, like we can talk about it, but like I think we need to talk about our future. And he just types, we have no future. And like my heart dropped, right? Because it's like, I thought that was probably true and it's probably best, but like, I don't know, maybe have a conversation instead of like this high drama. So I was like, wow, okay, so we should talk. And, I took a car to his house, and this was 2012. So like taking a car, it was like a much bigger deal. You couldn't even just live. I had to call like a car service, clearly the worst part. And, so we break up. He immediately changes his Facebook status to single, whatever. And then, so still all this stuff is going on, and my parents are living down the block. So I'm like, oh God, I can't deal with them right now. Like, because I'm too depressed to like, I just want to like sit in bed and cry. And the morning after we broke up, my bed frame had broken a few days before. So it was just like extra tragic because I'm 30 something and I have a floor bed. Not like a cool, like, oh, this is like hip floor bed, like just like broken. I'm on the floor. I wake up. I have shit myself. Like it's not, is shitting yourself funny sometimes? Yes, I had shit myself. And I'm crying, and I'm like, this is terrible. My friend comes over to comfort me about the breakup. My dad wants to come over to like get some piece of mail, and then he offers to bring me diarrhea medicine. So he comes in. I'm kind of half crying with my friend there, and he says, "Hey, how you feeling? Just so you know, I have to tell you something. I know there's your cousin's wedding is coming up. And before you go, I just want you to know something about someone in the family. Your uncle has cancer." Spins on his heel and leaves. And I just start cracking up because, breakup, shitting myself, waking up on the floor, hometown destroyed, and uncle has cancer. And he eventually died. And you know what? It's just, there's so much bad stuff going on that you can't even pick it apart. And it just becomes like, your brain at some point is just like, I can't, I refuse. And my friend Jen is sitting there. She's like, "Are you okay?" Because I'm just like cracking up, like not like I'm cracking up like in that like insane, like I'm about to like start ripping my hair out and like, clawing things, but just like genuinely like, you have to find this funny. How can you not? Like, is it terrible? Is it horrible? Yes, but it's also so horrible that it's funny. And now, this was 8 years ago now. Wow. In this pandemic, I am talking to you from an Airbnb back in my hometown, where I came in part because my parents are here and they can help me with my 11-month-old baby. So yeah, in the middle of disaster, I guess sometimes you end up back with family, whether you like it or not.
Lynn Bixenspan, thank you so much. And she is going to actually leave us walking away from this storytelling show thinking 3 of my favorite words to think leaving any storytelling show, which is, you gotta laugh. All right, folks, I want to thank our stage manager tonight and the general manager of Queens Theatre, Jay Rogers, and Dominic D'Andrea, who you saw in the beginning of this. Again, if you liked what you saw tonight, we're back here next Friday at 7:30. And this show here is going to exist on Queens Theatre's Facebook page if you want to recommend someone else watch it. But now, folks, we're going to end with a Zoom curtain call. So let's bring back up on stage everyone who performed tonight. Rhonda Hansome, Tracey Segarra, Mark Pagan, and Lynn Bixenspan. And I'm David Lawson. And thank you all so much. You've been a great audience tonight. We will see you right back here next Friday at 7:30. This has been Queens Storytellers Online. Thank you all so much. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Have a
Dave.
great time.
Thanks, Rhonda. Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. You're all great.
Thanks,
Yes.
guys.
You guys
It's
too.
a pleasure.